General Principles of Training. The next two chapters present in detail the specific physiological adaptations that result from resistance training, aerobic training, and anaerobic training. Several principles, however, can be applied to all forms of physical training. Principles of individuality. Athletes are not all created with the same ability to respond to an acute exercise bout or the same capacity to adapt to exercise training. Heredity plays a major role in determining the body's response to a single bout of exercise as well as chronic changes to a training program. This is the principle of individuality. Except for identical twins, no two people have exactly the same genetic characteristics, so individuals are unlikely to show precisely the same responses. Variations in cellular growth rates, metabolism, cardiovascular and respiratory regulation, and neural and endocrine regulation lead to tremendous individual variation. Such individual variation likely explains why some people show great improvement after participating in a given program, whereas others experience little or no change after following the same program. We discuss this phenomenon of high and low responders in more detail in Chapter 11. For these reasons, any training program must take into account the specific needs and abilities of the individuals for whom it is designed. Do not expect all individuals to have exactly the same degree of improvement. Adaptations are highly specific to the type of activity and to the volume and intensity of the exercise performed. To improve muscular power, for example, low intensity resistance training. He or she needs to develop explosive power. Similarly, the marathon runner would not concentrate on sprint type interval training. This is likely the reason that athletes who train for strength and power, such as weightlifters, often have a great strength but don't have high developed aerobic endurance when compared to untrained people. According to the principle of specificity, exercise adaptations are specific to the mode and intensity of training, and the training program must stress the physiological systems that are critical for optimal performance in the given sport in order to achieve specific training adaptations. Athletes would agree that resistance training improves muscle strength and capacity to resist fatigue. Likewise, endurance training improves the ability to perform aerobic exercise at higher intensities and for longer periods. But if training is decreased or stopped, detraining, the physiological adaptations that caused those improvements in the performance will be reversed. Any gains achieved with the training will eventually be lost. The principle of reversibility lends specific support to the saying, use it or lose it. A training program must include a maintenance plan. In Chapter 14, we examine specific physiological changes that occur when the training stimulus stops. Concepts, overload and progressive training form the foundation of all training programs. According to the principle of progressive overload, systematically increasing the demands on the body is necessary for further improvement. For example, when undergoing a strength training program, in order to gain strength, the muscles must be overloaded, which means they must be loaded beyond the point to which they are normally loaded. Progressive resistance training implies that as muscle becomes stronger, either increased resistance or increased repetitions are required to stimulate further strength increases. As an example, consider a young man who can perform only 10 repetitions of a bench press before reaching fatigue using 50 kg of weight. With a week or two of resistance training, he should be able to increase to 14 or 15 repetitions with the same weight. He then adds 2.3 kg to the bar and his repetitions decrease to 8 or 10. As he continues to train, the repetitions continue to increase and within another 5 lb of weight. Thus, improvement depends on a progressive increase in the amount of weight lifted. Similarly, with anaerobic and aerobic training, training volume, intensity, and duration can be increased progressively. Also called the principle of periodization, first proposed in 1960s, has become very popular over the past 30 years in the area of resistance training. Periodization is the systematic process of changing one or more variables in the training program mode, volume, or intensity over time to allow for the training stimulus to remain challenging and effective. Training intensity and volume of training are the most commonly manipulated aspects of training to achieve peak levels of fitness for competition. Classical periodization involves high initial training volume with low intensity. Then, as training progresses, volume decreases and intensity gradually increases. Undulating periodization uses more frequent variation within a training cycle. For sports specific training, the volume and intensity of training are varied over a macro cycle, which is generally up to a year of training. A macrocycle is more composed of two or more mesocycles that are dictated by the dates of major competitions. Each mesocycle is subdivided into periods of preparation, competition, and transition. This principle is discussed in greater detail in Chapter 14. Each person responds uniquely to training, and training programs must be designed to allow for individual variation. According to the principle of specificity, to maximize benefits, training must be specifically matched to the type of activity or sport the person engages in. An athlete involved in a sport that requires tremendous strength, such as weightlifting, would not expect great strength gains from endurance running. According to the principle of reversibility, training benefits are lost if training is either discontinued or reduced abruptly. To avoid this, all training programs must include a maintenance program. According to the principle of progressive overload, as the body adapts to training at a given volume and intensity, the stress placed on the body must be increased progressively for the training stimulus to remain effective in producing further improvements. According to the principle of variation or periodization, one or more aspects of the training program should be altered over time to maximize effectiveness of training. The systematic variation of volume and intensity is most effective for long-term progression.